Welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and presented by ICF International. Today's discussion is entitled Moving to Agile, Real-World Success Planning for Title IV-E Agencies. I'm Elizabeth Martinko. I'm your host and your moderator for today's webinar. Attendees are encouraged to participate in our webinar with questions and comments. All of our participant lines are muted right now, but we will open them at the end of the presentation for questions and conversation. You also can submit questions at any time using the GoToWebinar chat feature, and those will be addressed during the discussion at the end of the webinar. For those of you who haven't participated in one of our webinars before, you should have a GoToWebinar dialog box. It's usually on the right hand of your screen, although you can click on it and drag it around on your screen. If you don't see it, you should see a small orange box with a white arrow. If you click on that, it will open the dialog box. Scroll down to the questions, and you'll see a place where you can submit questions or comments. We also understand that some listeners have very specific questions about how CWIS will operate and about certain topics in the context of CWIS. In these cases, we encourage people to either send questions like that to ccwis.questions@acf.hhs.gov or to just chat informally with their federal analyst. That email address, again, appears on the slide and is ccwis.questions@acf.hhs.gov.
Elizabeth can be reached by email at elizabeth.mertinko@icf.com.
So let's meet today's speakers. With us today from Leading Agile, we have Jim Cundiff. He is the president. Michael Fortunato, a management consultant, and Devin Hedge, also a management consultant. And at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Jim Cundiff to get us started. Jim?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Cundiff, and I'm the president of Leading Agile. We're a small boutique consultancy, and we help enterprises develop, design, and implement frameworks, processes, systems that support continuous improvement, innovation, organizational change. We teach Agile, but it's really not about the practice or even the principles in the Agile Manifesto. Moving to an Agile way of working is really about creating business value to help you to meet your mission and provide better customer engagement. We try to bring you the most valuable products and features to market faster with more predictability while reducing risk. Michael Fortunato is our primary consultant who's been working on the CWIS engagement. And I'm going to introduce you to Michael, and he's going to take you through our presentation today. Michael?
Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to come and listen to this, have a conversation with us here about transitioning to Agile. We move next slide, Elizabeth. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the services that we provide. This document is available to you through your federal analyst if you don't already have it.
The slide shows the Leading Agile Consulting Services Guide, which outlines Leading Agile's goal, strategy, and 5-step approach.
It's a simple 5-step approach. But essentially, our goal and strategy and the way that we work is outlined here for your own information. We essentially are trying to help you get set up for success if you're planning or thinking about transitioning to Agile. The way it works is we'll have a couple of phone calls with you, one phone call to just assess your need and your interest in engaging technical assistance. If that turns out to be something that you want to do, and then we will have a second call to plan an on-site visit with you. So that's where we develop kind of how we're going to work with you on-site, the goals, what we're going to do, and help you get set up to conduct usually a 2-day working session where we have various workshops, change readiness workshops, things of that nature, that is customized for your state, your particular circumstances. Next slide, please. So far, we've been working with the states that you see here. We've been all over the country.
The list of states includes Alabama, Alaska, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington State.
We've had the pleasure of working with some great people who have been very open and working very hard to get ready to transition to Agile. We hope to meet more of the states as we go along. We've learned quite a bit, and we want to share some of what we've learned here with you today as well. So we're hoping that on the heels of this webinar that you all will pick up the phone or send an email to your fellow analyst and ask for some technical assistance, as we hope to meet you soon. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So before we start, I just want to say a couple of things. One, we thoroughly enjoy working with the states. We're invested in your success. The ultimate goal here is, protecting children and families, and we are invested in that success. We want to do everything that we can in the short time that we have with you to help you get set up to transition to Agile, to develop a new CWIS system, or whatever it might be. We're continuously trying to improve our approach. We know it's a dynamic situation. Every state is a little bit different, but everything we do is in the context of organizational change. Because Jim mentioned earlier, we do teach you Agile. We do Agile foundations and level set, but only in the sense that we want to make sure that you guys understand what you're signing up for, and to allow us to have conversations about what it would take in order to create an environment where Agile can thrive. So today, we're going to share some new material with you, and we really want your feedback on the material because we want our message to be clear and accessible and as simple as possible, considering the complex subject matter that we're talking about. Organizational change is very complicated, can be very complex. We're talking about human systems. But what we try to do is set up a process that allows you to move through it in a way that is right for you, and then most of all, just making you aware of all the things that you need to be aware of, short-term and long-term, in order to be successful. Next slide, please. So today we're going to share with you some of the common strengths and challenges that we've encountered and learned about in working with the states that we've already worked with. Surprisingly, these issues and things that we've discovered are not that different from the things that we learn in the corporate world. Changing an organization, they have similar characteristics. And we're going to share what we've learned with you and give you an example of what the output of that looks like when we come on site. And again, we encourage you during the question and answer session to share your feedback. If you've experienced these things, if you see these same things in your state. Because we want to encourage that knowledge and information sharing across the states. We can only do so much coming in as a consultant. There's a ton of value in sharing your experiences, sharing the successes that you've had with other states that are looking to go down the same path. We're going to share with you 5 key success criteria that we believe are important for transitioning to Agile, to being set up to deliver that business value that Jim talked about in kind of a lean sort of way. So you can deliver as much value as possible with as few setbacks and waste and all those things that can get in the way of getting things out the door as possible. It's an ongoing process. We understand that. And we're going to throw quite a bit of information your way today. I hope that it won't be confusing, that you'll get a sense of what you're up against, and it'll give you a greater sense of what you would need to do if you're looking to get started. At the end of the conversation, we're going to look to have an interactive discussion. So I'm going to try to wrap up in about 45 minutes if possible, at the latest at an hour, to allow at least a half hour for discussion after we've finished. Okay, next slide, Elizabeth, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about common strengths and challenges. We use a technique called the force field diagramming with the states that we've worked with. We find that it is an excellent way to start the conversation of, as an organization, what are the things that we see that we can build on? What are those things that we know are going to be challenges for us when we think about changing the way we work, moving toward a more agile way of working?
The diagram consists of 2 columns made up of arrows. The left column consists of green arrows pointing to the right. The arrows are labeled Leadership, Business/IT Partnership, Vendor Management, Agile Experience, and Enablement Team. The right column consists of red arrows pointing to the left. They are labeled Leadership, Business/IT Partnership, Vendor Management, Agile Experience, Communication, WIP/Space for Change, Procurement, and Legislative Process. The common strengths and challenges are things that we see in most states, and then every state has their own particulars, of course. But these are common trends that we've seen. The next slide, please, Elizabeth. Leadership, the top of the list. Leadership, if engaged, is absolutely necessary for success. And when I say engaged, we're going to talk in more detail about what that means. Agile requires that we have cross-functional support and coherence, all kind of marching toward a common goal. If we're going to achieve business agility, we have to work together cross-functionally to do that. And leadership has been named as one of the things that has actually shown up both on the positive and negative side of the fence. If you have leadership that is on board, is willing to step out and help you move forward with this, otherwise, potential issues that we see is disconnectedness between leadership, communication issues, and other types of things. One of the things we help to do to remedy this is to do Agile overviews for executives, and that is specific to leading an Agile transition for leaders, both mid-level management and executive leadership, to let them know what they need to do in order to support you as you begin to roll out Agile principles and practices. Business and IT partnership, another thing that shows up on both sides of the fence here. All of those things on the left-hand side we've seen both as positives, and as you can see, a lot of the things pointing off to the left in the red, they also show up as negatives. We've seen some good business IT partnerships where there was actual partnership and collaboration. We've seen other areas where it was actually necessary to get business and IT together, talk about how we can adjust some of the ways that they're working. We're going to talk in a little more detail around what that means. Vendor management. We've seen examples of successful vendor management where there were partnerships and collaboration with vendors, and we've seen the opposite. Same types of things. Horror stories in some cases of acquisitions that have gone wrong, locked into one vendor and resulting in systems that did not meet the needs or went over budget or whatever it might mean. We actually try to help you get set up to manage vendors in a way that's going to support and enhance your move to Agile. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. Agile experience as well. There have been some good examples and some examples where there was either very little Agile experience or possibly a bad experience with Agile, which makes it even harder to get that momentum back. Communication. By the way, communication is one of the biggest areas where we've seen this process break down. Communication is something that's often overlooked, but very rarely is it done in a way that supports the needs of everyone and keeps everyone informed and moving forward. We do quite a bit of work on how communication should happen in a transition to Agile when we come on site. We've worked with some great enablement teams, some folks that are very dedicated to the success of moving towards CWIS in an Agile way, and we look forward to meeting more enablement teams. It is one of the key aspects of making the Agile transition work. You need a dedicated team of people who can take the time to remove impediments and continue to drive the conversation and to instill that sort of discipline and leadership that requires to move to Agile. A few other things that we've seen that are potential issues that have been common. A big one is work in process and space for change. Everyone is overloaded in the States. We understand there are budget cutbacks. There are field workers who spend a whole lot of time just trying to get their job done. There's not always a lot of space to learn how to do something differently, to change the way you work. It is, however, one of the important questions that you have to answer if you're going to move forward. Procurement typically has been done in a more traditional way. We try to help you move procurement to the left side of this fence here and get them working with you as a positive. We're going to talk about how we do that as well. And, of course, the legislative process. Not very agile process, and this differs from state to state. Not necessarily something that you can do about it, but we do want to be aware of how it works and how we can best work within that legislative process and plan for it from a risk management perspective. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. What you might see as an output to this is something like this. So we'll take all of those strengths that come up on the left-hand side and the challenges that come up on the right-hand side. We'll assign them an arbitrary strength, 5 being the strongest, and 1 being the weakest.
A graphic of a man balancing on a teeter-totter. On the higher side is a list with a heading, 27 Forces Supporting Agile, and a list reading, 5 Executive/Leadership Support, 5 OTS/Technical/PTO, 5 OTS/Technical/PTO, 5 Enablement Team, 4 Agile Buy-in, 4 Federal, 3 Procurement, 1 Middle Management. On the lower side is a list with a heading, Forces Resisting Agile, and a list reading, Available Bandwidth, 5, Change Readiness, 4, Change Buy-in, 3, Vendor Management, 3, Budget, 2.
What we try to do is figure out how we can strengthen those things on the left-hand side. If something is a 1, how can we get it up to a 2 or a 3? What specifically do we have to do? If things are on the right-hand side that are resisting our move to Agile, how can we reduce or eliminate the impact of those things? It is a great way to begin putting a little rubber meets the road into this conversation. We've talked about where we are, and if we want to really change some things, what do we have to do about it? We'll do this initially on site with you. We recommend that you do this exercise again periodically, every 4 to 6 months, and to make sure that you're checking back that you are continually updating these high-level, broad types of strengths and challenges as you go along. Next slide, please.
A graphic shows text boxes arranged in a circle around the slide, with arrows originating in the center of the slide and pointing outward to each text box. The text boxes read, in clockwise order starting at the top, lack of visibility, too much work in process, firefighting, recurring patterns of dysfunction, inconsistent management support, no end-to-end ownership, dependencies, and silo operations.
It would be a little more specific when we talk about what kind of challenges and what kind of issues that we see out there. Siloed operations. We spend a lot of time trying to connect up the different cross-functional areas so that we can generate an end-to-end type of approach. Lack of visibility. If you can't see what's going on, and this may be both internally and working with vendors, very hard to manage, and it's very hard to adjust in an agile way. Too much work in process. Clearly, we've talked about that already. What we find is dependencies are one of the bigger things that show up when you start moving toward Agile. Dependencies that maybe you were able to deal with before are no longer tolerable. And so we have to really work to eliminate those dependencies where possible. Firefighting is a result of a traditional approach. These projects get behind shifting people around in order to meet some emergencies, and it's kind of a boomerang effect. We see this quite a bit. Lack of end-to-end ownership. Everyone owns their piece of the pie, but we need actually ownership of that entire process, that delivering value from the time we decide what value is and what we want to deliver to the time it's actually delivered to our users. Inconsistent management support, no fault of management. Oftentimes, consultants and organizations go down the Agile path without making it clear to middle management what their role really is. And there are a lot of misunderstandings about how managers operate within an Agile environment. And finally, recurring patterns of dysfunction. And by that I mean certain points in a project process whereby there's always rework, or there's always some sort of problem that requires a firefight. Those kinds of things that you see over and over and over again. We want to bring those patterns to light and start to adjust them, make sure that we can eliminate them as we move to Agile. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about change readiness. This is one of the major functions of our visits, right? We're trying to assess where you are, where you want to go in your Agile transition, and ultimately how you're going to get there. What are the constraints on achieving that ideal, and how far can you go towards your goal? Next slide, please. Current state. Well, current state starts with things like the common strengths and challenges that we talked about. We're also going to do some other things to get a sense of, what your organization is like, how things are working currently. Once we understand your current state, we call the Agile Level Set. This is a form of Agile Foundations, but it's really based in your current context. So when we talk about Agile, when we talk about all of the different principles and practices, what we're trying to do is not teach you how to do things like stand-ups or backlog management. What we're trying to do is give us all a common understanding of what Agile is and what Agile means to you, so that we can evaluate our future state and our vision. Once we understand current state, we've level set on Agile terms, Agile principles and practices. We can help you lay out the vision if you don't already have one. The vision is essential to the entire process because it's that North Star by which we make decisions. We're working iteratively and incrementally in the Agile space. We've got to keep our eye on the prize. And the vision, and actually just going through the process of crafting a vision, can be incredibly valuable. We come to a place where we have surfaced all of our hidden assumptions about what Agile means to us and can agree together where we're going. That allows us to do a real-world assessment of our future state. What's possible? What is possible for your state? Next slide, please. The change readiness is going to consist of what are the business goals? What are the constituent goals that we're looking at here? And the vision is actually intended to achieve those goals. What are your capabilities in terms of systems and otherwise? What kind of capabilities do you currently have? Strengths, challenges, and sticky issues. Change leadership. As I said, leadership is an incredibly important part of this. We need to assess where leadership is and help them get to the place where this can actually be successful. They're out in front, doing the things that leaders need to do in order to conduct an organizational change of this type. What is your risk, appetite, and tolerance? Risk appetite really speaks to how much space do we have for this change? How much confidence do we have that we can put in these principles and these practices and create the structures and decisioning processes that we need in order to move forward? How quickly can we do that? How large can we go? How big can this be? Do we need to start small and move slowly? Can we move more quickly with larger types of initiatives? Impacts and constraints. We have to understand and be very frank about what the impacts are. First of all, understanding the impacts to each of the different areas and the constraints that we have, and deciding based on that, what can we overcome, what can we fix, what can we move forward with, and that all bakes into that future state. It's a real-world future state. Many times we see organizations head down the Agile path without accommodating their impacts or even measuring their impacts, without accommodating their constraints. One of those, as we said, was creating that space. If you don't have the space for your program, your product ownership to actually participate in the process, you're going to have all kinds of issues down the road. And so a real-world conversation about what is available. If it's not enough time, and usually it's not, how can we create that space to work together? Agile knowledge and experience. We want to assess what knowledge and experience that you have, take advantage of that, and as part of that level set, make sure that we're all on the same page around knowledge and experience in the Agile space. Next slide, please. If you want to do a quick self-assessment on how Agile you are, one way to do it is to simply look at the 12 principles that come from the Agile Manifesto.
The slide displays the 12 principles. Satisfy the customer. Welcome change. Deliver working product frequently. Collaborate daily. Support and trust motivated teams. Face-to-face conversations. Working product primary measure of progress. Sustainable pace. Technical excellence. Simplicity. Self-organizing teams. And reflect and adjust regularly.
Do you have face-to-face conversations as a default? Do you do that always, sometimes? Or do you always default to email? or some other mode of communication. Sustainable pace, how is that working for you? The projects generally proceed at a fairly sustainable pace, or are you doing a lot of firefighting? Simply walking through some of this can generate some interesting and useful conversation, because if you want to know if you're really agile, all you have to really do is decide whether you're following these principles or not, and refer back to them regularly. It's not necessarily about doing Scrum right or doing any other Agile practice right. It's about following those principles. We talk about the principles in the context of organizational change, how we can enhance your ability to follow the principles, and what that would be like. Next slide, please. For the Agile Level Set, which I mentioned earlier, again, in the context of what's your business goals, let's talk about Agile principles and how we might apply them. Let's talk about what we call the basic model, which I'm going to talk about a little further on. If you understand what the basic model is in the Agile world, so a backlog, a team, and a consumable output, you can take that basic model and you can tweak it and customize it for your needs, knowing what the potential impacts of tweaking the model are. Oftentimes, when we come on site, we find that there is Agile functioning. However, there are certain common characteristics of dysfunction that have happened as a result of tweaks to the basic model. We want you to understand how the basic model works so that you understand not just that Scrum consists of these types of ceremonies and these activities and these roles. We want you to know how to design those roles for success in your particular environment. Dedicated teams. Can you create dedicated teams both for change leadership and for Agile execution? People whose job is to be on that team and to work toward that success. Multitasking and sharing of resources across teams is one of those things that can lead to a whole host of issues, including that firefighting issue that we talked about earlier. Where are you on the business IT partnership scale? Do you have a good relationship between business and partner and IT? Is it a shared risk model between the two? When we find that business and IT are on the same page and they have shared risk, then it is much easier to come up with a solution that works for the end users. Business knows what the users need. IT can actually help them craft a technical solution that works for their users as well as the internal architecture that you have. And building structures for agility. What does it look like? What does the structure look like? We have to make decisions both at the execution, the team level, the program level, and the strategic level. What does that structure look like? What teams, what processes, what activities and outputs and outcomes are we looking for? Next slide, please. Future state. Future state is about the vision. It's about business goals. Once we've established your vision and we understand what your business goals, then we can then start to talk about, well, how would we deliver these capabilities to our users? What's our rollout strategy? What do we need to deliver in first, second, and third? Right? What gets us the most bang for our buck, the most value to our users? What are our capabilities that we want in the future state? How flexible and adaptable can we be? Do we want to be? Our gap analysis. So here's our future state. Here's our constraints and impacts. Here are our gaps. How are we going to address those gaps? And again, risk appetite and tolerance comes in here because it plays into your rollout strategy, your change management plan, your roadmap. We try to, very early on, once we've established what your future state looks like, we have a gap analysis, we know at a high level what your rollout strategy looks like, then we can create a high-level roadmap that will give you the path to where you're going, and you can begin to fill in communication plans, training plans, and other types of things to support that roadmap. We'll also talk about building the decision framework to support all of this. You think about it, being Agile is really about who makes what decision when, with what information, and to what level of detail, and the empowerment and delegation to make those decisions. We try to drive decisions down in the Agile world as much as possible. We want to have business agility, want to deliver business value. We want the right people making the right decisions with the right information. And that's one of building the decision framework, one of the most important things that we help you do as you move forward. Next slide, please. So again, what is and what is not possible for you? Can you create the space? Can you conduct agile procurement? How much flexibility do you have in your process to do agile, to do procurement in a way that supports collaboration with a vendor, that supports flexible scope? How flexible can that scope be? Do you have the leadership support that you need? If not, what do we need to do to get leadership prepared? End goals and constraints. And one thing that we find is very important, and this is, if those of you have read any of Kotter's change management books, you find that quick wins. Anytime you start an engagement of this size, you want to be able to show success early on. We encourage states to have a quick win strategy. How are we going to get that big feather in our cap early on to demonstrate that this is working and that we're on the right track? Okay. And overcoming complacency. Complacency being another one of Kotter's assertions, in that when things seem to get hard, when moving to a new way of working seems hard, people tend to fall back on the old way of working and decide that it's just good enough. The new way of working, I don't have the time, it's too much. How do we overcome complacency? How do we plan for complacency and send a message out within our communication strategy and talk about what's in it for me? Because people want to know what's in it for me. And if they don't know what's in it for me, complacency can set in. Next slide, please. Okay, success criteria number 2, creating strategic alignment. Next slide, please. The elements of strategic alignment. Well, all of this is related, as you're probably starting to see. The vision and change leadership are essential parts of strategic alignment. We need leadership on board and leading the charge. We need a focus on project success, which means we need to open up those silos. I don't use the term breaking down anymore. I actually have a slide in here. It's kind of a little funny thing about breaking down silos, because you never really break them down. What we do try to do is open them up for greater transparency, greater communication, because we need to connect strategic decisions with the actual execution and software that's being developed. The way we do that is by developing this interaction model. You develop the interaction model with our help and that decision framework. If you create that decision framework, much more likely that it's actually going to be used out in the real world to get things done. And in general, we're looking for coherence, consistency, and transparency to the entire system. That is strategic alignment, vision leadership, everyone focused on project success with their eye on the prize. Transparency, strategic decisions connected with the software that is coming out and the capabilities that are being delivered to users. Next slide, please. We've been talking about leading the change here, and what does that really mean? Well, here's a list of things. There are other things, but we're not addressing now particular leadership style. So we're not talking about authentic leadership or servant leadership or relational leadership. But we're talking about doing the things that are necessary in whatever your particular style is in order to lead this change. Communicating the vision, being visible and engaged, prioritizing and optimizing. In the Agile model and in business agility, one of the hardest things to do is actually pick this thing over that thing. You need leadership to prioritize and to optimize. Think holistically of the whole system as across the entire organization, utilizing the system that we put together. So if we build a decision framework, empower those decision makers and allow them to make those decisions. Removing impediments. We need leadership out there. We cannot remove impediments that happen between different functional areas without upper management. It just simply will not happen. And if we've connected strategy and execution, we've created that sense of coherence, and we have leadership, it certainly makes it more possible. And then celebrating success. We like to see leadership celebrating those quick wins, consistently reinforcing that message of success and how you're going to move forward. Next slide, please. Just to illustrate what we mean when we talk about breaking down silos or strategic alignment, we need all areas to be focused on project success. But in order to focus on project success, you have to know what success is.
The slide says Project Success in the center and has arrows pointing out to different areas arranged in a circle around it. Clockwise from the top, these areas are procurement, management, program management, human resources, finance, technical/infrastructure, product, executive leadership, and legal.
We like to have members from all of these different areas in our Agile Level Set, in our foundations classes. We like to have cross-functional engagement when we do all of the change readiness that we do. Procurement, management, program management, legal, everyone understands, at least at a general level, how Agile works, how it's different, why we're doing this, what the benefits are, and how we're going to move forward together to create that coherence that we've talked about. Anything short of having everyone on board is going to show up as impediments, waste in the system, other things that get in the way of actually establishing that Agile transition. Next slide, please. Just a couple of interesting little funny things to share with you. Nothing really to talk about here, but I liked both of these. I was looking around for something to share.
The slide shows two comics. The first depicts staff sitting at a conference table with a chart on the whiteboard behind them. The caption reads, "Every time you say break down silos, I want to break down your face." The second comic depicts a man with a clipboard standing next to three men, each inside a silo. The man with the clipboard says, "I'm looking for help on this virtual team." The first silo has a sign that says, "Function," and the man inside says, "It's not in my P&L." The second silo has a sign that says, "Country," and the man inside says, "It's not in my objectives." The third silo has a sign that says, "Product Group," and he says, "I'd like to help, but..."
The one on the bottom right, I think, establishes that silo mentality that we're talking about. Local optimization is another way that we look about it. But when you're optimizing your area and everyone is focused on their own particular issues and impediments, it's hard to get things out the door. We need cross-functional cooperation. Next slide, please. The basic model. So I referred to the basic model earlier. This is a very simple model, and it may look familiar to some of you. A backlog, a prioritized backlog, a team that pulls from that backlog, and a consumable output.
The diagram depicts a column of 5 rectangles, each labeled Backlog Item. An arrow points to the right of the rectangles to a circle that is labeled Team. To the right of the circles is an arrow that points to the right, to a vertical tube that is labeled Consumable Output.
Now you may have seen this in some other form. You may have seen, Scrum illustrations that look similar to this. But this is what we consider kind of a generic Agile basic model. To understand how Agile teams function, to understand how Agile works, you understand this model, you can apply it in different ways. You can apply it at different levels and different areas within the organization. At the end of the day, what we've got here is someone who is making decisions about what's in a backlog, who's prioritizing those items based on whatever their particular area, whatever their particular goals are. There's a team that's pulling the top priority items from that backlog and delivering some form of consumable output. Now, we're not talking necessarily about working tested software here, although that is one form of the basic model. You'll have development teams that are producing working tested software in a Scrum team, for example. We're also talking about at the executive level, the strategic backlog. What are those strategic backlog items that we need to work on? What team is taking those backlog items and creating a consumable output that can be consumed and then moved on down the line through the program or portfolio levels, eventually becoming what we call Agile user stories, which is the value delivered to our user. In our Agile Level Set, we talk about how this model works. We talk about how you may potentially need to adjust it and what the impacts of that adjustment might be. The model has certain assumptions, including the fact that the team is fully dedicated, that there is someone managing that backlog who has both the knowledge and the ability, the market knowledge as well as the product knowledge for what the users need. Very often that's not the case. It's usually multiple people who actually manage the backlog. How do we handle those kinds of things? What does that consumable output look like? Right? How can we optimize that consumable output for the next set of things that need to be done in our strategy to execution model? Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about decision frameworks. What do we really mean by that? When we talk about decision frameworks, we're talking about a system whereby the strategic team connects to the program team, connects to execution. We're connecting, at any given time, we can find out where the elements of our strategy are. How are they being developed? What is the current state? When can we expect to see them? We're informing decision making. So if you can see end-to-end what's going on and you have the proper feedback loops set up, you can make better decisions about what your priorities are. Oftentimes we see that decisions are being made at the lower levels that probably should be made at the higher levels. And that happens sometimes because there's no space. The people who probably should make the decisions do not have the space and time to devote to it. So someone further down the line is making decisions. That leads to potential dysfunctions and common patterns that we see pretty often.
The diagram consists of a circular arrow in a counterclockwise direction. In the center of the circle are 3 boxes stacked vertically. The top box is labeled Epic/Themes Strategy. The middle box is labeled Epic/Features Program. The bottom box is labeled Features/Stories Execution.
But this model, if you set it up right, it facilitates continuous improvement. It gives you a tool for continuous improvement where you can constantly tweak and tune the system and how you make decisions and ultimately how you can better serve your users and your customers. Next slide, please. During our on-site visits, we help you figure out what the decision framework for you might look like. That includes the structure, what teams and what people are involved, what roles are involved, how do things flow from one level to the next, what are the boundary conditions? Those are those consumable outputs that we talked about. So at the strategy level, what is the consumable output that enables the program team, the team at the program level, to make the decisions that they need to make, to be informed, to make better decisions? How are we measuring success with our metrics? And what are our feedback loops like? What information flows back up the chain to further inform decision-making and to give us that flexibility and adaptability that we're really looking for by moving to an agile way of working in the first place? Next slide, please. General characteristics of the decision framework. It's transparent. We can see what's going on. It's lean, so we're trying to drive waste out of the system. And by waste, I mean wait states, trying to reduce the impact of some of these fairly sometimes involved approval processes that happen, especially within government. How can we have coordination and coherence, right? It is coordinated and coherent if it's designed properly and we continue to follow the process that we've set up and try to improve it as we go along. Next slide, please. What might this look like in practice? This is a very simple example of the different levels of decision-making in our decision framework: strategy, program, and team. We talk in the middle there, we talk a little bit about what the focus is. Strategic level can be from 1 to 5 years. It's a very high level, thematic we call it. It is prioritized, and it is based on both the internal and external environment. The output of that usually is a theme. Those themes are broken down into what we call epics, oftentimes in Agile speak. So epics are very large or larger parts of the system that we're going to build to help build out that theme. The executive level creates a consumable output. It's delivered to the program, and it's actually a collaboration that goes on between the two levels. So we agree on what activities and outputs are. The consumable output is then exactly what the program team needs to take it and do the next level of processing around those Agile epics. Features, epics tend to turn to features at the program level. There's a lot of capacity-based and other planning activities that goes on at this level. And ultimately, those features feed into individual Scrum teams or Agile teams where the working tested software is created. Now you see from the diagram, there's traceability from end to end. We have feedback loops set up, and we're connecting our strategy to execution here. So you can literally track a theme as it's broken down into epics all the way to the user stories. That's the idea anyway that we're going for. Next slide, please.
The slide displays two diagrams. On the left is the circular arrow diagram described earlier, containing the three boxes of epic themes/strategies, epic features/program, and features/stories execution. On the right side of the slide are two ovals. The top oval reads waterfall/hybrid, and the bottom oval reads vendor/COTS/GOTS. There are arrows pointing in both directions among all elements of the two graphics.
Quick real-world note here. We realize that the whole world isn't going to change to Agile overnight. We know that we're going to build this decision framework, connect our strategy to execution, but there's still going to be potentially waterfall and other types of processes out there. Initially, there's going to be vendors, COTS and GOTS and things like that we have to work within and with. We understand that part of the challenge is in figuring out how to do that. We'll help you figure out what those dependencies are and how you can manage them. Waterfall projects tend to be not very transparent. It's hard to manage dependencies, but by bringing everyone in early on and getting that cross-functional agreement on project success, you can actually increase the chances that, or minimize the chances rather, that you're going to have hiccups and other types of impediments pop up. Next slide, please. Quick note here about setting up vendor interaction models. So if you're looking to do CWIS, one of the things that we do is help you figure out what type of decision framework you can support. If we understand what that is, we can help you build a vendor interaction model that can drive your RFP process and set you up for a collaborative relationship with a vendor that in a model that you can support. The vendors are doing, if you're outsourcing to a vendor, system development, and you're going to need to be able to control the product decisioning. You've got to be able to keep pace. We help you take the lead on that rather than waiting to see what the vendor is going to come up with on how they're going to work with you. We help you design the interaction model that you want. You can then take that to the vendor and have them respond. It keeps the state in the driver's seat, actually ensures that you can support the model that, whatever the vendor is doing, you are in lockstep with them. Next slide, please. We're going to cover a little bit of procurement contracting and support, and I'm running a little bit behind on time here. We are coming out with a white paper to talk a little bit about procurement and contracting from a risk management perspective. We don't have time to cover it all here today. I want to share some information with you. It's really kind of food for thought. And then, if you have further information needs, please check in with your analyst and look for the white paper that's coming out hopefully soon. Next slide, please. Known problems in government systems development. Big upfront planning combined with fixed price and fixed scope contracts. We talk a lot about in our two-day sessions the impact of trying to write down all your requirements right up front and fixing that, both the price and schedule, to that requirements document. The problem with it is that there's a ton of risk in that document, and that if it turns out to be wrong, it really comes back on the state to have to pay to fix those things as they come up. We look for, common problems include, as a result of that, low quality and usability, reduced vendor competition. So you get locked into that one vendor, and it's hard to change simply because they've been working on this for so long. The cost to change and the time to change is just not possible. Cost overruns. So once that we figure out where the holes are in that document, someone has to pay in order to keep it going to actually get the system that we need. we'll get as close as we can. You have an increased amount of risk in this model that's not, the problem is it's not readily visible. The risk, a large part of the risk in this model is hidden. And so in Agile, we try to make that risk more transparent, and we try to create a shared risk model. Next slide, please. One of the ways that we try to bridge the gap between procurement specialists and legal and contracting and the Agile world is to find a kind of a common vocabulary. So if we can talk about, with procurement specialists, how we manage risk, how we control cost, how we can guarantee deliverables while having a flexible scope, and how we can define and manage quality, and how we focus on value, that allows us to open conversation for how this might be reflected in an RFP. There are many different ways to do it, and depending on your constraints within your state in terms of procurement and your risk appetite, again, there's lots of options for how this can happen. But managing risk and having a conversation in the context of risk is one of the ways to bridge that gap. Next slide, please.
The slide lists 8 bullet points. 1. Buying services, not products. 2. Contract combinations, T&M, FPPS, modular. 3. Flexible scope increases usability and quality. 4. Collaborative vendor model with constant performance feedback. 5. Clearly defined outcomes and process requirements. 6. Option to end early. 7. Verifiable progress and quality control. And 8. Agile architecture for loose coupling.
I want to cover a few key differences with you. We don't have time to dive into all of these, but the biggest one being in Agile procurement, you're actually buying services, not products. I'm going to talk about creating in the traditional world a requirements document and then handing it over to a vendor to actually deliver a product to you. In this model, ideally, we're buying services. We're setting the system up so that we can verify the vendor's performance through working, tested software in short cycles. We use the definition of done and other things to make sure that we're all in agreement on what that is. The collaborative vendor model, that interactive model that we've talked about, needs to be defined, and we'd like to see the states do that up front. We have verifiable progress. You can verify how well your vendor is working every 2 weeks if you're on a 2-week cycle. And also have an Agile architecture with loose coupling that allows you to make changes to the system in a more flexible and adaptive way. Next slide, please. So final questions around procurement. Here's some of those hard questions that we've talked about. How much flexibility do you have? What is your risk appetite? How do you want to design your decision framework? And again, this is all partially dependent on that leadership model that we talked about earlier. Do you have leadership engaged to help drive this discussion between procurement and contracting and IT and business? What is your internal capacity to support Agile development teams? It's fine to talk about going to an Agile way of working, but can we actually support that? If we write an RFP, we design our interaction model, can we manage it? What are our constraints? And what are our verifiable quality standards going to be? How are we going to guarantee that delivery? Right? How are we going to judge vendor performance along the way? Next slide, please. There we go. Change management is a vast, very vast subject about something that can be very complicated and complex. We're talking about human systems here. There's a lot that's been written about change management, a lot that continues to be written about change management, both within and outside the government. We're not trying to educate you on change management here or even go into too much detail on how change management actually works. We want to give you a sense of how we approach it, how we think about it, and how we help states understand and to set up a structured change management approach that works for them. General characteristics, we take a systems approach, so we look across the entire organization at all the different moving parts. It's risk-based. It's based on how much change that we can handle, how much space we can create, and all those other things that we talked about. It requires structure and discipline. So there is a change management plan It has to be flexible in an agile way, but there needs to be discipline about executing on the change management plan. Change leadership and change teams are an essential part of the structured change management process. Communication strategy, as I've said. Communication is usually one of the top lines and top priorities in your change roadmap. And that comprehensive plan with a very high-level roadmap is one of the outputs from our sessions. We'd like to be able to see very quickly, have a single-page view of our roadmap that we can then drill down on into the individual plans for more details. But having that roadmap, that single view, it actually shows all the different dimensions of your structured change model, I feel is important. Next slide, please. A few more characteristics. Informal networks and change agents. We recommend that if you know people who have influence within the organization, whether they're in management or not, that we build networks, that we build teams, we build informal support through these informal networks for the change. Generating those quick wins, generating positive buzz around what you're trying to do really does help supplement that more formal process of change, that top-down change, the drivers that we have there. Specific success measurements, both short and long term, and as I said, generating quick wins is highly important. Just a note on some of the more research-based change management structures that we like. Cotter is one, ADKAR is another. We also use a little bit of neuro-leadership science. There's some really interesting things going on around organizational change that are brain-based. I recommend, if you have any interest at all, that you look up what's going on out in that space. Next slide, please.
The slide displays 6 groups of people. On the top left is a yellow group labeled Executive Change Sponsors. Below them is a purple team labeled Enablement Teams. A diagonal line separates them from the 4 remaining teams. The top 2 teams are both yellow and are labeled Various Centers of Excellence. They are separated from the bottom 2 teams by a horizontal line. The bottom 2 teams are purple and are labeled Various Communities of Practice.
Along the lines of what do teams look like? What do change leadership teams look like? Executive sponsors. We'd like to see an executive change team of some sort that meets regularly, that owns this transition to Agile. They work with an enablement team who's more day-to-day, removing those impediments as the structured change management process moves forward. There are also things that are various centers of excellence and communities of practice. These are volunteer types of organizations and teams who build up within the organization, again, to promote that shared knowledge, build that fundamental sort of support for the change, and to share information clearly. Next slide, please. Now, the next 2 slides are some of the draft material that I mentioned earlier. We are putting together a change management playbook that we hope to help supplement this process and support it. So after we're gone, you'll have this to refer back to, kind of the structured approach, but with enough flexibility that you can customize it. Here, we're simply trying to show all of the different types of activities that need to happen and usually are happening in parallel, again, to make sure that the states understand what all is involved in actually transitioning to Agile.
A diagram labeled Multidimensional Approach Change Planning Guide. Arrows point to each dimension, which appear to the right. The different dimensions listed are Assess, Design, Align, Plan, Communicate, Mobilize, Execute, Improve and Expand, and RFP.
And as you can see, there's quite a few things. We call the multi-dimensional approach to this. And your roadmap should reflect all of these different activities as well as your change plan. Next slide, please. The previous slide kind of makes things look like you're working in a straight line. We all know that although we're proceeding forward and we like to move in a straight line, it's rarely that way. What we're really doing underneath the covers here is doing a ramp-up phase. We're getting ready to change. We're executing on the change. We're measuring our success, analyzing and adjusting it as we go. So in addition to the multidimensional aspects of the change management approach, you've also got an iterative and incremental function that is happening within that. So we lay our plan out, we execute, we measure, and we adjust. right? And that is a continual process all throughout the change. Next slide.
The slide depicts two diagrams. The first diagram on the left is a repeat of the diagram showing the multidimensional approach change planning guide. The second diagram on the right depicts a table. There are 5 columns showing different dimensions. The dimensions are assess, design, align, plan, and communicate. For each dimension, a list of activities are included for 4 categories. The 4 categories are activities, outputs, outcomes, and questions. For the dimension of assess, under the activities column are organization mapping, process review, and Agile Level Set. Outputs are force field diagram, risk assessment, and vision/future state. Outcomes are shared knowledge of change readiness and ready for design. Questions are, what is our risk appetite? And how do we create space for business participation? Under the dimension design, the activities are interaction modeling and teams and roles. Outputs are system design and interaction model. Outcomes are shared understanding of the planned execution process and roles and responsibilities. Questions are, how will we measure success? Under the dimension of align, activities are design communication and cross-functional collaborations and coordination playbook. Outputs are system design and interaction model. Outcomes are shared responsibility for end-to-end delivery. Questions are, how do we establish end-to-end ownership? Under the dimension of plan, activities are rollout strategy/workshops. Outputs are roadmap, rollout strategy, and draft communication and other plans. Outcomes are ready for mobilization. Questions to ask are, what capabilities do we want to provide to our users and when? Under the dimension of communicate, activities are stakeholder mapping and messaging strategy workshops. Outputs are draft communication plan and roles and responsibilities. Outcomes are shared commitment to comprehensive, ongoing, and consistent communication. Questions to ask are, what specific messaging do we want for each stakeholder group and when?
You see how all this ties together a little bit and what we're looking to do in the playbook. You can see kind of the on the left-hand side, you've got the multi-level activities which are going on. For each one of those activities, we're looking at activities, outputs, outcomes, and questions that you could refer to as you move through the different processes. I want you to be able to see for each phase, for each line item on the left-hand side, the types of things you need to be doing, the types of deliverables you would need to produce, and what your ultimate outcome is. What is that greater purpose that we're trying to achieve with assessment, for example? In that case, it's a shared knowledge of our change readiness and to be ready for the next phase, which is design. This is in draft format. It is something that we're working on. We're interested in your feedback to this type of approach. Next slide, please. Quick example of what a roadmap might look like. Again, multi-levels, as you can see.
The diagram shows a timeline across the top of the CM roadmap stretching from July 2017 and extends through December 2018. The kickoff stage appears slightly before January 2018. 2 releases are marked as milestones, the first coming about 1/3 into 2018 and the second coming about 2/3 into 2018. Underneath the timeline is another diagram with several rows labeled Rollout Strategy, Legacy System, Communication, Training, Services, and Third Party. The first row of the diagram is Rollout Strategy and starts with RFP in July 2017. Slightly later is Vendor Engagement. Modules SOW1, SOW2, and SOW3 occur between approximately August 2017 and the first release milestone around March 2018. Another set of modules labeled SOW1 and SOW2 are next, between Release 1 and Release 2, which is around September 2018. The last box in the row is Modules. The second row of the diagram is Legacy System. The first box is Legacy System Twilight Plan and is depicted from approximately August 2017 and January 2018. The second box shows Legacy System Twilight Execution and runs from approximately January 2018 to December 2018. The third row of the diagram is Communication. Running across the timeline is Broad-Based Communication. Targeted Communication runs from July 2017 to approximately February 2018. A second round of targeted communication runs from approximately February 2018 to September 2018. The fourth row is labeled Training Plan and runs from approximately September 2017 to the second release. The fifth row is labeled Services. The box in the timeline is labeled Architecture/Infrastructure/Shared Services and runs from approximately September 2017 to the second release. The sixth row is labeled Third Party. The box in the timeline is labeled Third Party Integration and runs from approximately September 2017 to the second release.
The top two levels there are timeline associated with your rollout strategy. Most child welfare agencies kind of have a modular type approach. We've paired that up with vendor engagement and sort of a statement of work, a series of statements of work. In this case, there are short 3-month statements of work per module, or a certain number of statements of work per module. You can see that on the right-hand side there, module is all you see. That is just by design. That's a little further out than we want to plan for detail. And all the other levels here, of course, the levels in your particular state may vary, but communication will most likely be the second thing on the list. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, success criteria number 5, Agile support and guidance. We believe and we know that to be successful in a move to Agile, that you've got to have ongoing support. We can only do so much in the short period of time that we're there. We can help you get set up for success, have a structured approach, build your decision framework, get your RFP process off to a good start. But once this thing actually kicks in, and even beforehand as you begin to collaborate with vendors, you need expert guidance and support. Next slide, please.
The slide contains 6 bullets: risk management technique, independent voice/industry experience, navigate the minefield, best fit, customization support, and practical guidance.
That means Agile coaching, potentially having Agile expertise on the ground with you every day to support your teams. It is an excellent risk management technique. A good coach can help you navigate the minefield of moving to Agile. They can give you practical guidance that you need. Having a coach around, really the first week of the first month and the first year are the most important times. You're going to be making a ton of decisions. Having a coach or coaches on board to help you make good decisions, we think is essential. Next slide.
The slide contains 5 bullets: structured approach, research-based methodology, CM, Agile Project Management, communication, and expertise from outside.
Change management consulting. We kicked the ball off with change management consulting, but it is an ongoing process. As I said, it's multi-level. There's an iterative and incremental aspect to this and a continuous improvement approach. We recommend that you have change management expertise available to you along the way. Someone that you bring in on board or have access to it periodically, someone that can help you continue to improve your processes and improve that structured approach that you have. Okay, that is really pretty much the program for now. I think we have some additional information here. Next slide, please. So if you need further assistance, you can contact your analyst. We're available to, for phone calls through our process that we shared. For now, if you have questions, I think we're ready to move into the next phase of the discussion. There are a couple of slides here that have, let's run through these slides really quickly. A few references for you around federal government publications and guidance, which you're free to look up on your own with the U.S. Digital Service, the Digital Services Playbook, TechFAR, and the Office of Management and Budget. All have very useful information.
The slide displays 4 websites. 1. United States Digital Service. Website, https://www.usds.gov. 2. Digital Services Playbook. Website, https://playbook.ciao.gov/#PLAYS_ANDEX_ANCHOR. 3. TechFAR. Website, https://techfarhub.cio.gov. 4. Office of Management and Budget. Website, https://tec_software_dev/memo_CAO_CPE_software_DEV_FED_MKTPLACE.pdf.
And the digital plays are just here for reference. This is from the Digital Services Playbook. Just extra information that is very good reading and relevant to what we do.
The slide lists 12 bullet points. 1. Understand what people need. 2. Address the whole experience. 3. Make it simple and intuitive. 4. Build the experience using agile and iterative processes. 5. Structure budgets and contracts to support delivery. 6. Assign one leader and hold that person accountable. 7. Bring in experienced teams. 8. Choose a modern technology stage. 9. Automate testing and deployment. 10. Manage security and privacy through reusable processes. 11. User data to drive decisions. And 12. Default to open.
Okay, Elizabeth, that is, I believe we are wrapped and we're ready for questions.
Thank you. At this time, if you would like to ask a question, press star, then 1. You will be prompted to record your first and last name. To withdraw your request, press star 2.
Elizabeth speaks.
Great. Thank you so much, Dory. And Michael, thank you so much. That was a lot of information that you gave us. I really appreciate that. I'm just reminding our audience that you also can submit questions via the GoToWebinar chat box. Just open the dialog box, and if you go down to chat or to question, you can enter either way, and we will see them. And I also wanted to give Jim and Devin an opportunity. I didn't know if you had anything that you wanted to add in at this point while we're sort of waiting for people to line up for questions. Jim or Devin, if either one of you are speaking, you're on mute.
Jim answers first, followed by Devin.
I really had nothing to add. I think Michael covered it all.
Okay.
Yeah. Just in reference to the letter that Terry had sent out, and Michael had covered this, but specific services around on-site assessments to really establish a shared understanding of the different business drivers, strengths, weaknesses, Agile foundational trainings, workshops. We talk about specific practices. We'll introduce change management techniques. We'll talk about story mapping and road mapping and story writing and different techniques that you've probably heard of in the Agile practice space. We'll also help you develop a roadmap, a strategy approach, albeit at a high level, to really help you to align your structure and your goals and the steps necessary, the steps that you'll have to take to be able to transform the way that you're working.
All right. And Dory, do we have any questions on the line at the moment?
At this time, we have no questions.
Okay. And for folks to line up on the phone, it's star 1?
That's correct.
Okay, so star 1 if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. I also did want to let everyone know that we have the PowerPoint slides as a PDF handout. Those are in your GoToWebinar dialog box. If you open it up and you go, it's near the bottom, about second from the bottom, you'll see a tab that says Handouts 1 of 5, and then the Adobe icon and the name of the PDF. Just click on that, and you can go ahead and download that. So you're welcome to download those and use them for your reference as well. So again, any questions, if you'd like to go ahead and submit those via a GoToWebinar dialog box or press star 1 on the line. And Dory, do we have anyone lined up for questions at this point?
We have no questions.
Okay. Well, with that then, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up for today. I just want to thank our colleagues at Leading Agile. I think this has been really a fantastic and informative presentation. I know you put a lot of time and energy and effort into it, and Michael especially, I think you must be exhausted at this point. You covered a lot very quickly but very clearly, so I just want to thank all three of you so much for sharing this with our audience today.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.